Hello everyone, welcome to my patch 14.10 tier list. There were a lot of system changes in this patch, which means there is some shake-up to the mid meta. And I think overall there's actually more viable mids than before, especially in the higher tiers. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the big changes, explain how they affect the mid meta, and then I'll talk about some of the specific champs later on. So you'll find that all timestamped in the description below. So the very first change we're actually going to talk about is the changes to jungle, because it affects mid a lot. So jungle, especially carry junglers, got big buffs this patch because they just get more experience. And this combined with the new Blackfire item has made AP full clearing junglers very, very strong. So that's champions like, I think Karthus is probably the best champ in the game right now. Lilia, Brand, and Talia are also very, very strong. And the reason is because of Blackfire. So Blackfire, when completed, is a pretty good item overall. But particularly the component, this deals 20 bonus magic damage per second to monsters. This doesn't actually change when it's upgraded. So you're kind of getting the value of the fully completed item in terms of clearing camps on a 900 gold component, which is absurd. Now, this did get hotfix nerfed. I still think it's very, very OP though. So that has made the jungle meta, again, there's like AP full clearing junglers. And so what does that mean for mid? It means that ideally you will either play AD mids, for example, Tristana or Corki or Jays or Aurelia or whatever, right? Because we don't want to do double AP mid jungle if we can avoid it. Or it can mean that we play some sort of mid that doesn't mind having double AP. So champs that are more utility based, such as Ahri, can function with that, right? Like you could play Ahri with Karthus. It's definitely not an ideal pairing, but it's fine, right? So you're going to see AD mids in general are a little bit higher on the list, and some of the mids that value being solo AP a little lower on the list. That being said, at least in high elo, a lot of these champs are getting banned, so you actually still see AD junglers quite a lot, just because these AP junglers are getting permabanned at the moment because they're so broken. So yeah, overall, I guess look out for more AD mid picks this patch because those AP junglers are so strong, but they're so strong that they're getting banned, which means AP is obviously are still very viable. So then let's come back to Blackfire for mid. So Blackfire for mid laners is okay. It's not OP. I don't think it's underpowered. Actually, I think it's fairly well balanced for mid, which means that it's a good item on the champs that can use it well, or on champs that didn't have a good item before, right? A champion like Malzahar, for example, that just didn't have an item. Now that they can buy Blackfire is really nice. Something I also think is quite good about this is it's a pretty good buy later in the game as well. Even if you're a champ that doesn't use Blackfire that well, you can buy Blackfire like very late in the game because of the AP scaling and also because of the bonus percent AP it's going to give you. So I think some champs where before they might go for like a last item Lichbane because that was just, you know, a high AP ratio plus movement speed. Potentially now you can look for like a last item Blackfire, even if you're a champ that might not necessarily use it well, something like Orianna or something like that. But yeah, you will see some of the champs on this list that didn't have an item before, again, such as Malzahar, move up on the list. Vel'Koz is another one, because now that they have a fairly solid first item, it's made them a lot better. First Strike also got a really big change this patch, which was they front-loaded the gold towards this first initial proc, which means that in either ranged versus melee matchups where you can proc it really consistently, or if you're just playing a very long range champion and can consistently be the first one to proc it, you're going to get a lot more gold. And also, just in general, because it's, you know, a lot higher flat gold and less on the scaling, this means you get a lot more gold early. You do get less damage as the game, or sorry, you get less gold as the game goes on compared to before. But overall, the gold is coming a lot earlier and at a lot more useful times, right? Like before, sometimes you'd take first strike and you'd only have like 150 gold earned by, say, like 15 minutes. But then it would snowball out of control, right? You'd end up maybe at like 800 or something at 30. I think now it's like very, very common, at least I've noticed, that you can have, say, 400 first strike gold at 15 minutes or sometimes even more. And while, yes, it's not going to go as crazy in the mid game, you still manage to get quite a lot of gold. So I think first strike's really, really OP. And you're kind of looking to... I would say if you can get away with first strike right now on most champs that can use it, you absolutely want to. So this is a bit of a nerf to the assassins that can't proc it that consistently. So something like a Talon or a Fury that were kind of relying on the gold income later in the game as opposed to being able to proc it early. It's absolutely amazing for longer range champs, you know, something like a Xerath that can proc it really consistently. Or even, again, you know, if you're laning, say, LeBlanc versus melee or Ahri versus melee, and you can just proc it over and over and over. So first strike, absolutely amazing on this patch. It isn't something you should take every game, right? Like, let's say you're playing something like Syndra versus Lux. I would say actually neither side should take it because it's going to be too hard for either of you to proc it way more consistently than the other person. You know, so those sort of matchups, you'd still want to go Comet or something. But first strike is really, really strong, and that is I would say it's just like a buff for mages across the board, and some of the other ranged champs that can use first strike. Luden's was changed a lot this patch, and it's kind of a revert, just going back to the old Luden system where it's got a cooldown and it just kind of bursts for a lot of damage. They also buffed the damage on it in general. This is really, really good for those burst mages who were only really itemizing archangels because they didn't really like Ludens. It just wasn't that strong. Or for the mages that couldn't build anything except for Ludens. So obviously it's good on champions like LeBlanc that could really only go Ludens or Malignants. It's great on Syndra because I think it's now just better than Archangels unless you really need that survivability. It's also really good for champs like Victor because I think champs like Victor now actually have multiple choices, right? You can go for Seraphs if you need survivability. You can go Blackfire for DPS or you can go Ludens for burst. And having those options is really, really nice. So even though like I'd say a champ like Syndra or like LeBlanc might be a little weaker because of the jungle meta, if you are getting those AD champs on your team, then I think they are pretty strong champs with the buff Luden. And finally, there are all the crit item changes. So this doesn't affect mid lane that much, but there are a few champs obviously that use these very well. So Tristana mid is probably the best AD mid at the moment. She is mostly blindable. She only has a couple really, really bad matchups. She has a dash, pairs well with most of the AP junglers, and of course makes use of the crit changes. Corki is another one, so I will go more in depth on Corki later in this video, so go to the Corki timestamp, but Corki has multiple different builds, and a lot of them have crit in them, almost all of them actually. There's a lethality build, which I'll talk about, but crit Corki is quite strong, and also I think Lucian has potential. I've seen a few different Lucian builds, but there's, I think the Essence Reaver, i.e. Navori, looks pretty good. I've also seen Bork builds, but I'm not as sold on it. So I definitely think crit AD mids are not bad at the moment, and there actually might be more ADCs that can be played mid. You know, something that was popular a very long time ago was Jhin mid, just because of all the movement speed, and Jin's pretty strong right now. There's potentially something around that can be good. I'd say the changes overall were negative towards Yasuo and Yone, but again, I'm going to touch on those a bit later in the video. So now we're going to talk about specific champions, and the first one is Ahri. So Ahri's kind of always the queen of solo queue just because she's so pickable all the time. She's very flexible, you know, fits into most comps, good against most lanes. I also think Ahri is one of the better AP mids with AP junglers, and the reason for that is, one, she's self-sufficient, so you can allow your full clear jungler to, you know, clear their camps, and they're not really going to have to assist you because you're so good at neutralizing. Also, you tend to get pushed in a lot of matchups. Not all of them. Like, there are some hard lane bullies that will stop you. But you're able to get pushed in most lanes, right? And that, again, allows you to protect your AP jungler or to help them invade or, you know, skirmish if they really want to. And because she has utility and isn't focused on full damage, it's not as bad for you to be double AP. I will say it is still better for your AP jungler generally to be solo AP. That being said, I have trust issues giving my jungler solo AP sometimes. So something you could think about, but I think Ahri is still very, very strong. You can build her with Ludens if you want, and something I haven't actually experimented with, but I think is good, is if you're going Electrocute Ultimate Hunter, I think you should go Ludens, and if you're going First Strike, you know, against a melee or something, and you don't have Ultimate Hunter, I think then you should go Malignant. So I haven't tried that, but I think that's the tech. Next champ up is Hwei. So Hwei got some indirect buffs this patch, so Ludens is quite good on Hwei. I think Deathfire is not bad on Hwei. I think it's something you can build, especially if you think you're going to be AoEing a lot of people down. But I do like Ludens on this champ quite a lot as well. But either way, it means that you can, you know, not go Archangels if you don't want to. Another thing that's really good about Hwei is that he's very, very good into Tristana. And Tristana is that premier AD mid blind pick. So you're going to be seeing Tristana in, I would say, like almost every game in high elo at the moment. If you're in lower elos, I mean, Hwei is just strong in general. But specifically for that counter pick, it's extremely, extremely strong. I'd say virtually unplayable matchup for Tristana. It's also quite good against the other AD mids as well. I'd say Hwei is pretty good versus Corki. It's pretty good versus Jace. It's pretty good versus Akshan, right? So a lot of these very common AD mids that are coming out more often because of the AP junglers are just hard countered by Hwei. So it's a great champ to have more as a counter pick right now. You can blind pick him, and he's not bad because he does have self P on, he does have mobility, wins most of his lanes. I think it's overall strong champ. It is vulnerable to a few things, but overall it's still going to be pretty solid. So that then brings us to Tristana. And I think Tristana is overall the best AD mid. She uses the crit items quite well. I think the build that a lot of people are going is just straight IE Navori because you can rely on the attack speed that comes from your Q to still have a decent spike with that IE. I've also seen people playing Bork on her, but I can't say I'm a huge fan of this, although it might be necessary in certain lanes. You know, if you do end up against a Hwei or something, it might be better to go Bork. In the past, people used to just buy Vamp Scepter in this lane or like buy Merc Treads, but I feel like those... Well, one, if you buy Vamp and don't build, you know, your items straight out of it, feels a lot weaker in the early game. And I think Mercs and Tristana feel kind of bad too. Another thing you can do is you can rush Kraken on this champ just for the initial spike. I personally do prefer just the straight IE rush. One more thing people have been doing is Collector Rush. Can't say I've tried this, but it seems like it's a viable option. The main thing with Tristana is, again, just to try and avoid those more difficult matchups and to be paired with an AP jungler. The thing is, even if you end up not being able to carry the game per se with Tristana, you should be allowing your AP jungler to do so, right? Like if you have a Karthus on your team and your push mid is allowing you to protect Karthus from being invaded, it's allowing you to carry any early skirmishes or stuff like that. The Karthus is just going to scale in 1v9, and then you're not going to really need to do a whole lot. At least that's the theory. Maybe that's a less of a reliable win condition in lower elos, but at least in higher elo, I think Tristana is still very strong for that reason. Corki is another premier AD mid on the patch. So the Corki rework changed a lot about him. Now he's a bit more early game focused. He's a bit more auto attack focused. And his builds are very different as well. So I think Corki is extremely good if you can get away with it. He does have some difficult matchups. And the thing is, even though he's actually stronger early, he's not as good of a neutralizer. So he's actually going to win more lanes than before, but the lanes he loses, he's actually going to lose harder. And the lanes that you lose are typically going to be those longer range mages. Again, something like a Syndra or an Ori can be quite tough for you. I think the best build on Corki, if you can get away with it, is just the Essence Reaver IE build. Now, I will say there are a lot of different builds. So some people go Triforce first. That gives you quite a strong first item spike. It's also got a much better build path than Essence Reaver, and it's got health on it, which can help with some of those more difficult matchups. But the cost is that it delays those crit spikes. Another thing I've seen people experimenting with is just lethality Corki, because it does a lot of damage. Now that all your damage has been moved back to AD, you do very little magic damage. Just going for a straight lethality is an option, so that's something that you guys can look into. Even though the build is still kind of up for debate on Corki, the things that have kind of been solved is it seems like Emax is just better than Qmax. I will make a longer video on Corki in probably a couple days, just talking about what I think the best is. But I think Emax with either Fleet or First Strike, depending on if you're versus a melee or a range. If you're against range, take a Fleet. If you're against melee, you can go for First Strike, and that allows for a lot of scaling. And yeah, the champ still scales pretty well, does a lot of damage, but it's also just a lot stronger in that early game. Now, you guys probably have a lot of questions about Brand, and I do think Brand is pretty strong on the patch, especially in jungle. And I think if you're below like Diamond or something, Brand's probably going to be really, really good. I'm going to do a low elo tier list next week, so Brand's probably going to be very high up on that. But let's talk about it. So I think one thing Brand really struggled with before was having a good third item. Because what would happen is you'd go Rylai Liandry, or you go Liandry Rylai, and then it was like, okay, well, you can go Shadow Flame, which is like kind of good, but it's not great, right? Like, especially if people have MR. You can go Death Cap, but you don't have great AP ratios. So at that point, you're just going like Cryptome or something, which never really felt that good. I think Deathfire now functions as a really good third item. So you can go, again, Rylai Liandry or Liandry Rylai into that Deathfire third, which does, it smooths out your build a lot better. And obviously it's got a little bit of an AP ratio on it, which is quite nice if you go for a Death Cap or something fourth. The reason I think you don't want to rush this early is because Brand doesn't really need mana at all. And also Brand kind of needs a little bit of health because he's so short range. One of the weaknesses of Brand mid is that it's quite hard to take Ghost because a lot of the time you need TP, right? Because the matchups are just too hard. If you're in higher elo and people know how to abuse a lack of TP, it's going to be really, really tough. And so that's one thing in the jungle you can get away with, right? You can go something like Ghost Smite because you don't need TP. Now, I will say Brand gets bonus points because he's probably a Quadra-flex right now. In fact, maybe you can even play him top 2. You can definitely play him mid-jungle and AD. I think he's probably a pretty decent support at the moment. And I have seen Rylai's Rush Brand top before, so it's maybe something that can be used. And that's actually very valuable. So even if the champ itself maybe isn't broken tier in mid, the fact that you have this like blind pick that people have no idea where it's going and, it's going to do a lot of damage regardless. People aren't that familiar with brands. They don't know what to pick into it. That for me makes them a bit higher on the list. But like I said, I actually think mid is one of his weaker roles because I think you can take Ghost in jungle. You can take Ghost in top. You can take Ghost in AD. And that's still better. And also Ghost did get nerfed this patch, which is a little annoying. Again, you can kind of make do with TP, but it feels bad, right? I think it's a champ that really does like to take Ghost. So Brand overall, a little stronger, actually quite a bit stronger, but still maybe not in the A or S tier for me. Another champ with big changes was Viego. So Viego got big changes to Q sustain, which was meant to help him, be able to play lane a bit more. Now, I will say that I have only played against one Viego so far, but I have seen a few people play Viego in lane, whether that's top or mid, and it seems pretty strong. So I think I might actually be underrating it here. I think it potentially because it's a triple flex in jungle, mid, and top, and potentially because it's blind pickable with the sustain, similar to something like Akali, potentially it should be all the way up here. The only reason I've put it lower is simply put, I have not seen enough of it, right? I've only played against it once, and it was a jungler auto-filled mid. But I've seen like Showmaker has been playing some Viego. I'm sure there are other people playing it as well. This is something that I definitely want to come back to, you know, probably next patch or something. And if you guys are experimenting with Viego mid, I'd, you know, encourage you to leave a comment below. Let me know. The Viego one trick on Korea, I believe his name is like Need Her or something like that. He's been doing pretty well with it. I think he had like a 60 or 65% win rate, obviously early in the season, so the matchmaking's a bit wonky. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it has potential, and I think I might be criminally underrating it, but I just want to play it safe for now. And the final champs I want to talk about are Yasuo and Yone. So right now, they're both sitting pretty low win rate. I do think I do think Yone is a lot more salvageable than Yasuo at the moment. I think you know, just going for something like a ZLIE or, you know, PDIE builds aren't too bad. That allows you to get your crit online fairly early while still being able to get tanky with, you know, something like a BT later on. I think the problem with the Bork builds is that, you know, you rush out your Bork, great one item spike, decent build path, but then, you know, you're kind of stuck at those, like, you get 2 more items, but you're still very, very squishy, and everything in the game does so much damage right now, right? The AP junglers are going to pretty much one-shot you. The AD carries, especially, you know, stuff like Caitlyn, just do insane amounts of damage, so if you're not tanky by that point, you just explode. And I think that's what makes it really hard. I wouldn't be surprised to see these champs get big buffs in next patch. I saw, you know, the tweet about them being just built, you know, badly, and I think that is somewhat true, but I don't think people have been doing the optimal builds, but I think despite that, they are relatively weak at the moment. So I think that's going to be it for my tier list. I will say this is one of the tier lists I'm less sure about, just because it's relatively early in what is a very big patch, and we'll probably see as things begin to shake out, as more of the ideal builds come about, and, you know, some of the stronger champs in other roles cement, right? Like if it turns out there's, I don't know, like a really strong ADC and mid pairing, it might be that you play, let's say, Orianna with Jinx or something like that, right? Like that could be some really strong pairing, for example. Or maybe crit AD carries are so OP that we start playing like Karma and Lulu mid. Let's hope that's not the case. But maybe it's a Karma Lulu Seraphine mid meta, right? Like that's possible. So obviously early on in the patch, I did wait a little bit longer on this one just to make sure that there wasn't anything too out of line. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. If you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comment section below. But one thing I want to quickly say before I leave is I really wish Riot would make an item, kind of a utility-based item. You know, I think Deathfire or Blackfire did a great job for champs like Mal's or Vel'Koz that really lacked an item. But I think, like, you know, not Everfrost, but like some sort of Everfrost equivalent for champs like Lissandra and Zilean would go a long way. Because these champs are weak, but it's only because they don't have an item to build. It's not because the champs are weak. In fact, they're actually pretty strong as champs, but their items really hold them back. So yeah, that's it for real this time. Leave a comment below if you have anything to say. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.